St. Ignatius was born in the late 15th century, and his biographers readily recall that he was not a saint before he became a saint. He didn't live always like a saint. He was a military man, and he lived like a military man, doing what other military men do when they're not fighting. Providentially, he was struck with a cannonball in his leg. It knocked him out. A serious injury to his leg, which lasted more or less his whole life. And so he had to convalesce. He had to get well. And he was put in a room in Spain, and he only had 2 books to read, or a few books to read, 2 holy books to read, and some other non-holy books to read. And he alternated between reading unholy books about knights and chivalry, and then occasionally he would read from the life of Christ, a holy book. And he began to notice a difference in how he reacted to what he read. When he read about knights, that excited him, but the excitement quickly left him. When he read the life of Christ, that didn't so much excite him as to give him purpose and meaning. It had a deeper satisfaction. This was one of the most significant graces of his entire life. He began to discern the spirits. He began to realize that not all spirits are from God. Spirits move a person like the wind. The word for spirit in the Old Testament is the same word for the wind. And the wind moves things. And so St. Ignatius knew there were 2 kinds of winds, 2 kinds of spirits. One leading to evil, and the other leading to good. And this would be one of the most important teachings that he would bring into his spiritual exercises. St. Ignatius would become the patron of retreats because of the spiritual exercises which he composed before he was educated, before he became a priest. He said that they were given to him by the Blessed Mother. And this would be the most important thing, to help people discern in their experience which spirits led them to God and which spirits led them away from God. These spiritual exercises were composed while he was living in a cave after his conversion, because once he realized the difference in spirits, he chose to follow God, and he chose to imitate Christ in doing so, in poverty, chastity, and obedience. He began to beg for food, and during this time he started teaching people about the spiritual life. Interestingly, he got into trouble doing so. The man who would later put other people on trial for orthodoxy was himself put on trial before he became a priest by the Inquisition. His spiritual exercises were considered doubtful, possibly erroneous, and he escaped death, being put to death by a narrow margin. They almost burned him at the stake. The church. He was helped afterwards to go to Paris to study, to become a priest, and during this time he acquired other followers, like other Jesuits that would eventually follow him. So the beginning of the Society of Jesus, called the Jesuits, began while he studied for the priesthood, and then they went to Rome. And not only did they take the three traditional vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but he took a fourth vow of being obedient to the Pope wherever the Pope would send them. So he formed a missionary order to be sent wherever the Pope would send them. And this order grew tremendously, and it would become the means of countering and fighting back heretics, pagans, Muslims, and Protestants especially. This order, the Jesuits, were considered the solution to the Protestant revolt. God raised up a great saint in order to defend the Catholic faith against especially the Protestant heretics. Saint Ignatius would see in his life the order grow, and the Jesuits would become one of the greatest religious orders of the church. Unfortunately, there's a saying in the church: the corruption of the best is the worst. If the best thing gets corrupted, that's the worst thing that can happen. And so, when the Jesuits got corrupted, especially in the 20th century, they would be largely responsible for corrupting the rest of the church. We can think of, for example, Father Karl Rahner, a Jesuit. He was the lead theologian at the Second Vatican Council. And Father Rahner was largely responsible, with others, for bringing erroneous teachings into the Vatican II documents. The Jesuits had already been corrupted with modernism by this time, and they would further corrupt members in the Catholic Church because they were largely responsible for educating priests and bishops throughout the world. So we ask through Saint Ignatius's intercession to help the church to set it back on its right course and to help us defend against the errors of today. In nomine Patris et Filii